used to think there'd always be a seat for me, even if it was at the far end of the table. The photo wasn't meant for me, but there it was, buried in the feed, half-cropped and over-filtered, posted by a cousin I hadn't seen since prom. A white linen table under strings of lights, crystal glasses, an oil painting of my father propped beside a floral arrangement too large to be sincere. And in the center, Lara, shoulders back, smile practiced standing like she'd always belonged in that house. I tapped the image once to zoom in. The stone railing in the background hadn't changed. I used to lean against it during spring storms, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. My father once told me that was how you measured how far danger really was. I believed him. There was no mention of a memorial, no call, no group text, not even a courtesy forward from the funeral home. I waited for a second post, maybe a video, something that would suggest this had been a quiet gathering, private impromptu. But more photos followed, plates, speeches, someone giving a toast. I was not in any of them. I closed the app and opened the county records page. It didn't take long to find the deed. The words were neat, digital, sterile, joint ownership of parcel 1143 Maple Ridge Lane transferred to Lara Harris. Sole proprietor status confirmed via amended estate filings. My name wasn't listed, not as beneficiary, not as co-heir, not even as daughter of the deceased. I stared at the screen long enough for the automatic timeout to log me out. The mug on my desk still had coffee in it, though the surface had filmed over. I tilted it slightly. A dark ring circled the bottom, old habit. I always leave something behind, even in silence. I dialed Claire Bennett. The line buzzed 3 times before she picked up. There was no greeting, no pretense. "You shouldn't go back there!" That was all she said. No legal explanation, no offer to meet. Just that. And I didn't ask her to explain. Her voice was sharp, clipped like someone who had seen too much and was now choosing where to bleed. I could hear papers shuffling faintly in the background, or maybe I imagined it. Maybe I wanted to believe she was still holding something that hadn't yet slipped through. When I didn't speak, she added, "They've already decided." And with that, the line went quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I just set it down gently beside the keyboard and stared at the wall for what must have been 10 minutes. The photo was still on the screen. I printed it. It came out slightly faded. My ink always runs dry when something matters. I didn't crop it, didn't write anything on the back, just slid it beneath the edge of the lamp where it cast a faint shadow across the desk. There had once been a drawer in my father's office, labeled important. It held an old wristwatch. He no longer wore a half-used notepad, a folded blueprint of the house, and a receipt from a hardware store we visited when I was 7. When I asked him why he kept it, he told me some things didn't look like value until you needed to prove you had it. The house was never just architecture. It was intention. Every brick, every frame, every window had meaning. My mother had picked the tile in the kitchen. My brother had etched his initials into the back of the garage door with a screwdriver. I used to hang my coat on the same hook every day after school, second from the right, because the first was too high. But now there was no hook, no receipt, no name. I went into my closet and pulled out the green envelope I'd kept in a stack of untouched mail. The return address was missing. I had thought it might have been from Noah. At first my brother's handwriting was always soft and slanted, but it wasn't. Inside was a flyer for a charity gala, bold font glossy paper with a smiling Lara at the bottom corner. All proceeds in memory of Brooke Callahan, a man of vision and grace. They didn't mention who made him that way. That was the last thing I opened from that house. I didn't reply, didn't send anything back. I folded the flyer into fourths and slid it behind the printed photo. I didn't need to see it again. I just needed to remember that it existed once. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by nothing but air and an ink-streaked printer, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't about being left out. This was about being erased. And some erasures come so quietly you don't hear them until the silence starts to echo. I didn't say anything that day. I didn't send a message or draft a statement or call anyone for confirmation. I just reached for the lamp, turned off the light, and let the photo disappear into the dark. I never expected anyone to make room for me. I just kept standing there, hoping they'd notice I never sat down. When my mother passed, I flew home on a red-eye without packing a single bag. I had a green folder tucked under one arm, filled with forms the army might ask me to return. I didn't open it again. I just left it on this kitchen counter until it curled at the edges. No one saw me cry. Not at the wake, not at the burial, not when the food went cold and the guests went home. I kept a pot of coffee going for 3 straight days. People stopped by to pay respects, dropped casseroles in foil pans and whispered things like, "She was light." They meant well. They always do. My father said almost nothing. He stood at the window for hours at a time, tracing the edge of the frame with his thumb, like he was trying to memorize it. I cleaned the pantry called the bank, found the insurance card in a drawer beneath a stack of expired coupons. The kitchen smelled like lemon wipes and things that used to matter. Noah started sleeping on the floor of my old room. He didn't want to be near the staircase anymore. I let him. He didn't speak much, just held one of Mom's old scarves like it could hold him back. The day after the service, I found a note tucked inside the back cover of her recipe book. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just 5 words written in her careful print. Let them keep their noise. I folded it once and slid it into my wallet. Weeks later, my father asked if I could help clear out the garage. It wasn't a question. I rolled up my sleeves and spent 2 full days moving paint cans, sorting nails by size, and labeling wires he never used. When I pulled the old radio from under the top, I asked if he wanted it restored. He looked at me for a long time, then turned back toward the house. I took that as permission. I paid for the restoration myself. A man in town fixed the crackling frequency, replaced the tubes, and rewired the knob so it no longer stuck at 600 a.m. I left it on the kitchen table with a post-it. She liked this station. The next morning it was gone. Not broken. Not thrown away. Just gone. I didn't ask about it. I drove Noah to school, stopped by the cemetery, then went to the bookstore and picked up a collection of her favorite poetry. I placed it on the nightstand in her old room, the one that no one dared call hers anymore. That night, Margot Harris joined us for dinner. It wasn't an announcement. It wasn't a conversation. She just appeared one evening, standing in the hallway with a pan of something sweet and a scarf that didn't belong to her. My father pulled out a chair and poured her a glass of wine. Noah didn't eat much. I didn't either. "I like what you've done with the garden," she said. I hadn't done anything, not since the funeral. A month later, they married, he told us at breakfast. 2 sentences. No eye contact. She makes things easier. I nodded. I bought them a gift. A glass globe with preserved eucalyptus. It looked expensive, but wasn't. I wrote a card that said, "Wishing you peace." She sent a text 3 days later. Very thoughtful. "Brooke, thank you." I replied, "Of course. Thank you for looking after him." That night, I sat at the edge of my childhood bed, scrolling through photos of different cities on my phone. I wasn't searching for flights, just places where my name wouldn't be a footnote. When Noah started locking his door at night, I didn't question it. Chase Margot's son had moved in by then. 16, loud, confident in ways that made you want to check the silverware drawer twice. He watched horror movies until 2 a.m. Ate standing up and never said excuse me. Noah kept earbuds in whenever he was home. I offered to drive him to a boarding school 2 hours away. Not as punishment. As a kind of rescue. He didn't argue. Before he left, he whispered, "Do you think she knows I see through her?" I didn't answer. The last dinner, I remember us all sitting at the same table. I brought up a commendation I'd received. It wasn't national, but it meant something. I held the envelope in my lap the whole time, waiting for the right pause. When I finally mentioned it, Margot smiled and turned toward the mirror behind her. "This dress photographs terribly in warm light. I'll have to change stylists." My father didn't look up from his plate. I tucked the envelope under my thigh and said nothing else for the rest of the night. It's strange what you remember. Not the arguments or the slammed doors, just the quiet after. The pause no one bothers to fill. The space where someone might have said, "That's something to be proud of," but didn't. I started noticing patterns, empty coffee cups in the sink before I got up, new throw blankets where hers used to be books, rearranged on shelves that had belonged to my mother, notebooks with my handwriting missing from drawers. The post-it I left on the restored radio never resurfaced. One afternoon I overheard her on the phone saying, "She's just passing through. It's transitional." I wasn't sure if she meant me or Noah. It didn't matter. I stopped refilling the pantry, stopped folding towels the way my mother had taught me, stopped trying to make the house feel familiar. I told myself I was being respectful, that maybe I was learning how to adapt, that people change and we're supposed to change with them. But I kept the recipe note in my wallet. Let them keep their noise. Maybe I had stayed too quiet too long. Maybe silence too can be mistaken for permission. Some things don't leave a bruise, but you still learn where not to touch. The envelope was pale blue with embossed silver trim, folded neatly at Noah's place on the kitchen table beside a slice of cake he wouldn't finish. His name was spelled in print, careful and too even, like someone had practiced. There was no return address, no sender written inside the flap. It was the only card on the table. I didn't ask. I just carried the plates to the sink and wiped the countertop twice, even where it was already clean. Noah looked up briefly, then down again. There wasn't a second envelope. Later that week I found the wrapper from the card tucked into the waste bin under the stairs. The packaging was from a boutique I remembered Margot mentioning once, the kind that marketed sentiment by the ounce. No one had bothered to sign it. The second Christmas after the wedding, the tree was themed. Silver and green, nothing breakable. I watched her adjust ornaments in silence while my father read the same page of a book for over an hour. When she handed out gifts, the labels were all handwritten in soft cursive. Noah got a monogrammed journal. My father, a leather valet tray. Chase an electric speaker shaped like a football. Mine came in a rigid box, the kind used for shipping scarves or hosiery. Inside was a silk wrap still bearing its barcode. The price tag had been scratched out with a black marker that bled through. "Thought this color might soften your look," she said. "You wear such serious things." I folded the scarf once and tucked it back into the box. It stayed there unopened for months. Eventually, I used it to wipe down the inside of my duffel. That year, I'd been awarded a regional commendation, Leadership Excellence in Operations. The letterhead had a seal, and the commendation came with a certificate embossed in foil. I left it on the dining room sideboard, not in arrogance, but because I hadn't found the right place to put it. During dinner, I mentioned the recognition. The table paused, then resumed. Margot cut her asparagus and glanced at her reflection in the kitchen window. "That's nice," she said, though not every woman needs that kind of validation. No one corrected her. No one looked up. I pushed the certificate aside to make room for the serving platter and never moved it back. A month later, Noah sent me a drawing through the mail, pencil on thick sketch paper. Our mother seated on the porch, one leg crossed, her eyes tilted towards something just outside the frame. It wasn't perfect. The proportions leaned slightly off, but the posture was unmistakable. She always sat like the breeze might carry her if she let it. I taped it to the inside of my closet door. 2 weeks after that, it came back to me folded in half. The lines were creased through the face. Noah didn't say how it happened. I already knew. I brought it to my father. He glanced at it, then handed it back. "Chase is still learning boundaries," he said. "Try to be patient. He's young." I flattened the paper under a stack of books and never opened the closet again while I lived there. Small things changed in patterns. The main dining chair, the one with the curved back and worn arms, became Margot's by unspoken rule. She arrived before the rest of us placed her water glass just left of the setting and adjusted the napkin twice. No one told her to sit there. She didn't ask. She simply did. My mother used to sit there. After dinner, she'd rest one hand on the chair's edge and ask if anyone wanted coffee. That handprint had worn into the grain. Now I sat nearest the end. Noah across from me. Chase in the seat next to my father. I poured the water. I cleared the plates. I wiped the crumbs when no one noticed. One evening, Margot placed a new table runner down the center green embroidered floral. My mother's was lace soft, always folded by hand and never machine washed. I asked where it went. Margot looked confused. I assumed it was too old, probably frayed by now. I didn't answer. In the hallway upstairs, my room door stayed closed. Inside, little had changed except for the smell. The air had gone stale. Furniture shifted slightly. The bookshelf was shorter. One of the windows stuck. When I opened the closet, I found an old coat of mine folded on the top shelf, still smelling faintly of cedar and detergent. In the pocket was a note I'd once written to myself, a grocery list, half faded with my mother's handwriting at the bottom. She'd added, "Don't forget eggs. Love you more." I kept the note. Later that year, Margot converted the den into a wellness space. The bookshelves were removed. Framed posters went up, quotes about clarity and tension boundaries. The piano disappeared without announcement. Noah stopped coming home for weekends. Once I caught Chase standing in my doorway, turning a snow globe over in his palm. It had been mine since childhood, a gift from an uncle long past. The base was chipped, the snow clumped. He turned to me and shrugged, didn't realize it still meant anything. I didn't respond. When he left, I locked the door. The last time I visited Maple Ridge before everything unraveled, I wandered into the guest room at the end of the hall. It used to be my room after college, after my first deployment, after every attempt at coming home. Margot had repainted. Pale grey walls, a minimalist desk, a yoga mat rolled tight in the corner. A small frame rested on the shelf above the desk. The photo inside was of my family before. My father, my mother Noah, and me. We were seated on the garden steps. My mother's hair was caught mid-motion. My father's hand rested behind my shoulder. The photo had been turned face down. The glass was smudged. A faint ring on the wood suggested something had been placed on top of it. Recently, perhaps a candle or a vase or a book. I left it that way. Some things aren't lost. They're just left where no one's willing to carry them. Some disappearances aren't gradual. They happen all at once on paper in ink with someone else's signature. The email came without subject, no greeting, just a scan of a single-page notice from the county clerk's office. Cal had forwarded it late at night, likely out of quiet respect rather than alarm. He didn't include a message. The document was neat. Clinical. Black, serif on white. It listed the full transfer of title to the Maple Ridge estate from the late Robert Callahan to Margot Harris and Chase Harris joint and equal ownership. No addenda, no clauses. No mention of survivorship rights for direct descendants. I read it 3 times before standing. There was a scratch on the screen right across the second Harris. I stared at that mark longer than I should have, tracing it with my thumb, as if pressure alone might lift it from the surface. I dialed the number listed at the bottom of the form. An assistant answered and transferred me without pause. The voice on the other end was flat. Practiced, Mrs. Harris holds full administrative rights under the revised testamentary declaration dated February last year. No biological claims were included. Then, after a short pause, "You seem to have misunderstood your role in this." I didn't respond. I ended the call. Claire's number was still saved in my phone under emergency. I didn't change it. I hadn't had cause to. When she picked up, she didn't ask how I was. The original will was revoked. I was notified by formal removal a month before his decline. There was no anger in her voice. No sympathy, either. Just the quiet detachment of someone who had watched the door close from the outside. I found the printed draft she and I had reviewed with him years ago, folded into a black folder in my file drawer. His notes were in the margins, messy but earnest. I ran my fingers over the ink until it smudged. No reference to that version appeared in any of the new documents. Noah sat on the edge of his bed when I told him, a book half open beside him, dog-eared but unread. He looked at the carpet for a long time. "I'm not surprised." He didn't lift his eyes. "My mother once wrote our names on the inside of a music box lid, hers, mine, and Noah's, each in a different coloured pen. She kept dried violets in the drawer beneath it, flattened between scraps of hymn sheets. She called it her quiet drawer." I found the box last. It was sealed in a clear storage container marked in red, non-essential, to storage. Beneath it, a labelled stack of sketchbooks tied with twine. Her handwriting still visible on the corners. Beginner. Brooke. Trees 1999. Noah's first hands, all covered in a fine dust that didn't belong to any living room. To the left, a flat canvas wrapped in paper. I peeled back one edge. It was the portrait she painted of us, unfinished, but unmistakable. Our mother with a wide-brim hat. My father standing behind her, one hand barely touching her shoulder. My younger self, looking up. The eyes weren't filled in. A neon sticker covered the top corner. Discard, if not claimed. The cabinet that once held these was now empty. The glass shelves wiped clean, lemon-scented. A single framed print of an abstract wave had taken its place. The carpet beneath where the cabinet had been still bore faint indentations. 4 square patches like the ghost of something that once stood with weight. At dinner that night, no one spoke of the change. Chase asked for seconds. Margot adjusted the volume on the dining playlist. My father's chair remained vacant. I filled my glass with water and drank half without tasting it. Mid-meal, Margot looked up briefly. "You've been awfully quiet. You know this house is shifting into something more contemporary." She laughed once. No one joined. Then, lightly, "Some rooms just have to be cleared of sentimentality to feel fresh." I nodded once and folded my napkin into thirds. In the hallway after I ran my hand along the wooden banister, there was a chip where the varnish had worn thin, a spot my mother used to polish with a cotton cloth. She said it caught the morning light best when clean. It no longer did. I walked into what used to be the family den. Boxes lined the far wall, stacked neatly, labelled in Margot's handwriting. Clear tape, no dust. Holiday. Rehome, guest linens. Sell old photos. Review, sentimental Brooke. Archive. I opened that last one, inside a ceramic bowl with a crack down the middle. The one I made in 8th grade and forced everyone to use for candy at Christmas. My mother had written Brooke's masterpiece on the bottom in Sharpie. Taped to the top was a note not in my handwriting. Unclear significance. That night I sat in the garage for an hour without turning the ignition. The next morning I made a list of items I had left in the house. The list was short. Most had already been packed, repurposed, or assigned. There was no room in the new version of the home for the versions of us that once lived there. At some point, I stopped trying to understand. Inheritance isn't always money. Sometimes it's just the echo of your name in a hallway. Or the drawer that still smells like someone who loved you. That echo had been papered over. The drawer now held charger cables and hand weights. And my name was nowhere. Some departures don't come with goodbyes. Just a final, private decision not to return. The suitcase lay open on the floor, half empty though I had packed all I needed. A soft wool sweater with a coffee stain on the hem I never managed to remove. The scarf with loose threads my mother once folded for me before a long trip. A sketchbook filled with Noah's clumsy shapes and half-drawn trees torn at the binding. I slid it between layers of clothing. The rest I left. The blouses never worn, the boots I once tried on in silence. The mug with my initials that no longer stayed on the shelf. When I zipped the bag closed, the sound filled the room. No one came. The keys were still on the hook by the door, next to a leash. No one used a set of bells Margot hung last Christmas that no longer rang. I took only mine, the smallest silver with a worn ridge down one side. As I passed the dining room, the table was half set for a late lunch. A folded napkin bore Chase's initials embroidered in gold. Margot's touch. I never had monogrammed anything. My plates had always been plain. She stood in the hallway just before the front door. Her cardigan was unbuttoned, soft pink, like the kind my mother wore in spring. She smiled tight, deliberate. We're trying to do what's right. For everyone. You know that. Her tone was low, almost sympathetic. Her hand grazed the door frame, and I saw the ring, his ring, the one that used to sit on my mother's dresser in a velvet box. The stone had been replaced. She waited for me to answer. I didn't. I held her gaze, not to challenge, not to plead, only to look fully before walking past. In the foyer, the smell of wood polish lingered. It was different now. Not lemon. More like cedar. New but unfamiliar. The old armchair where I once waited after swim lessons was gone. A mirror had taken its place, modern and thin. My reflection caught briefly, flat backlit, expressionless. The front door creaked even though I had oiled the hinges the last time I visited. They must have stopped using the oil. Or maybe some things just remember how to resist being opened. From the corner of my eye I saw a movement. The study door was ajar. My father stood there already in his navy blazer, the same one he wore to the funeral. It hung looser now. He didn't come closer. I waited just long enough. Was I wrong? I asked, not louder than breath. Did I fail you, somehow? His reply came as he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, brushing away lint that wasn't there. This is what makes sense, not a verdict. Not even a closure, just a line drawn with no intention of returning to erase it. I nodded once. That was all. I stepped outside. The porch looked cleaner than I remembered. The rocking chair had been replaced by a wrought iron bench, sleek and sharp. I had scraped my knees once beneath that rocker, as a child hiding candy I didn't want to share. That scar was still faint on my shin. The wind pressed gently at the back of my collar. I stepped toward the gate. The keyring felt heavier in my palm than I expected. I turned it over twice, pausing at the smallest key, the one to the side garage. I remembered when my father made it for me the day I returned from basic training. He'd said, "This house will always have a place for you." I unhooked the main key, the one to the front door. It stuck slightly, the metal worn thin where it rubbed against the ring. I eased it free, fingers slow, deliberate. The iron gate still had that notch on the top rail, a dent from when Noah tried to ride his bike through it without opening the latch. I used to tease him for it. I looped the key over the corner, watching it settle between the bars. It swung gently, catching the light once before becoming still. No tag, no ribbon, no note. Behind me, the house stayed quiet. No one opened the door. No one called after me. I had taken nothing that could be missed. No photographs, no heirlooms, only the saw. I didn't cry. Tears never served me much. I reached for my car door and stopped, hand resting on the handle. For a long moment, I stood still. Some houses know when you leave for good. The way a drawer closes slightly different when it's empty. The way light stops hitting the frame the same way once the photo inside is gone. This was not a confrontation, not a gesture of defiance, just a door I would no longer use, and a name they would no longer say. Some silences don't echo. They just hold space. I didn't unpack the first night. The suitcase sat in the middle of the floor, like a guest that hadn't decided whether to stay. The walls were uneven, faintly yellowed with outlines where someone else's pictures had once hung. I didn't hang anything. The floor creaked in certain spots. I mapped them without trying 3 steps from the bathroom to the kitchen, one sharp bend near the heater that groaned without warmth. I never turned it fully on. The room was bowled in a way that didn't demand correction. The table held only a mug, white ceramic hairline crack on the base. I found it in the cupboard and used it without rinsing. The first coffee I made tasted flat. I drank all of it. 3 mornings passed before I noticed how quiet it was. Not just outside, inside. No voices down the hall. No footsteps belonging to someone who questioned my use of space. I heard my own breath more than once. I didn't adjust the blinds. I let the morning come in only as far as it wanted. I didn't play music. I didn't check the news. I slept. Not the kind of sleep people speak of wistfully. Mine came like a curtain, sudden, weighted. I didn't dream. I didn't turn. I woke without knowing what time it was and didn't reach for the clock. There were no alarms, no expectations. My phone vibrated once and I turned it face down. Claire tried to reach me twice. The screen lit up with her name once in the afternoon, once again near midnight. I let it ring out both times, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to speak to someone who might try to make sense of something that didn't deserve sense. I didn't cry. I didn't make lists. The only thing I did every morning was open the second drawer in the small cabinet by the stove. Inside it, wrapped in a faded cloth napkin, was the music box. My mother's. The one with the chipped corner and the velvet lining pulled loose. I wound it once. It played the same 6 notes and then stuttered. The gear caught. The song never finished. I could have taken it apart, looked for the break, but I didn't. I let it stop. I closed the lid. I returned it to the drawer there was a laundry room 2 floors down. I used it once. The dryer didn't fully dry, so I laid my clothes across chairs and cabinet handles. The scent of detergent filled the kitchen for hours. It reminded me of the way my mother folded towels, tight corners, no wasted space. I didn't fold anything. I let the fabric soften under its own weight. A neighbor knocked once, mistaking my door for someone else's. A boy, maybe 15, with earbuds and a textbook under one arm. He looked at me and blinked, unsure if he should apologize or ask a question. I didn't speak. He backed away, polite, and let the door close gently behind him. That was the only knock I heard all week. No one came looking. No one asked where I had gone. Margot didn't text. Noah didn't call. My father remained as unreachable as the dead sometimes are, even while breathing. I made tea one evening. The water boiled over while I stared at the wall, not because I was lost in thought, but because I wasn't thinking at all. The sound startled me, but I didn't move fast. I poured it slowly, watched the steam lift and let it cool before taking a sip. The mug cracked a little more that night, a soft fracture near the rim. I didn't replace it. I wore the same sweater twice without washing. The stain near the sleeve had faded slightly, maybe from wear, maybe from time. I touched it once, not to clean it, but to remind myself it was still there. The window faced a quiet alley where no cars passed. A fire escape ran along the building across from mine. Some evenings a cat would appear on the metal grate, black, thin eyes sharp. It never meowed. It just sat, watched, and left. I didn't name it. I didn't name anything in this place. The bed was stiff, the frame older than the apartment itself. I didn't adjust the pillows. I let the sheets stay wrinkled. I slept with one blanket over my shoulder and let the other fall to the floor. When I did think, rarely it wasn't in sentences. Just fragments, like the door clicked shut. The necklace didn't belong to her. This is what makes sense. I didn't argue with the fragments. I let them pass like dull knives drawn across skin, blunt, inevitable. The day before the rent was due, I walked to a nearby grocery store and bought only what fit in a single paper bag. Apples, bread, a small jar of honey. I left with no receipt. I didn't take a cart. The clerk didn't look up. No one asked where I'd come from. The silence didn't press on me anymore. It stood beside me. At night, I sometimes placed the scarf beside the pillow. Not to use, just to be near. Its threads were loosening. A few had curled. I didn't tie them back. I let them fall where they wanted. I thought about sending a letter. Not to explain, just to confirm departure. Then I didn't. I thought about fixing the music box. I didn't. Some things remain broken not because they must, but because their silence says more than any repair. Some calls come dressed as concern, but carry the weight of utility. The voicemail played once, then stopped. The voice was male, even-toned, the kind of polished, legal cadence that belonged more to boardrooms than living rooms. Mrs. Harris would like to know if you might consider attending the upcoming memorial. For the sake of family continuity, it's important to show unity. No mention of my name, no acknowledgement that the man being remembered had once braided my hair on camping trips. Just optics. I didn't save the message. I didn't delete it either. It just remained there. Paused like a breath held too long. The radiator in the corner clanged once. I hadn't fixed it. The sound had become something like company. I poured myself coffee, though I never finished the last cup. The stain from yesterday's brew still marked the inside of the mug. It had a chip near the handle from when I moved in and dropped the box labeled K. The next ping came from Beth, a cousin though that term had worn thin over the years. Her message read, "Just heard about the service. People might wonder if you're not there. You know how Aspen Grove talks. Not grief, not love, just reputation." I imagined her typing that with 2 fingers and a wine glass within reach. No punctuation. I let the screen dim. Later, I opened the manila envelope Claire had forwarded. Inside was a printed scan of a property listing. Parcel B, Maple Ridge Estate, zoned for development, authorized by Chase Callahan, sole heir. Margot Harris listed as estate executor. There was no mention of my father's original will. No clause about children. No notation about shared lineage or inherited history. Just value. Square footage, utility hookups, proximity to trails, a bullet-pointed list of how best to erase a person by parceling out their land. Claire's handwritten note rested at the bottom margin. "You deserve to see this before it posts." I placed the paper on the kitchen counter. The edges curled slightly from the humidity in the room. I didn't smooth them. The apartment was quiet, save for the occasional pop of the baseboard heater. I moved through it, the way one moves through someone else's space, deliberate, cautious, unreliant, on memory. Noah messaged that evening. "They're afraid you'll go public." 7 words. No greeting, no sign-off. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for a pushpin and fixed the land scan to the corkboard by the door. Beneath it, I tacked the quote card I'd found in an old notebook. "Silence, too, is a language." I stared at them both, side by side. Legal ink and forgotten ink. One built for signatures, the other for reminders. 2 days passed before another envelope arrived. This one smaller, more decorative. Cream-coloured with a gold trim, the kind they use for holiday parties and anniversary dinners. Inside was a folded card, on the cover in loving memory. Inside a printed invitation. "The Harris family warmly invites you to join us in honouring the life and legacy of John Callahan. Saturday at 3 p.m. Reception to follow." There was no sender's name, no address, no handwritten note, just margins wide enough to keep me at a distance. I held the card over the stove for a moment, not close enough to burn, but near enough to feel the heat rising through my fingers. Then I placed it on the windowsill beside the empty vase I hadn't filled since moving in. Later that night, Claire called. I let it ring out. The voicemail icon blinked once, then disappeared. She didn't leave a message. Beth tried again this time, with a group photo attached. Last year's memorial, perhaps. Everyone lined up in black and navy. Margot in pearls. Chase with his arm around someone unfamiliar. I wasn't in the frame. The caption read, "Family Strong." The phone buzzed a final time before I turned it face down. I walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside was the music box still wrapped in the same faded scarf my mother used to wear when she painted on rainy days. I didn't wind it. I didn't need to hear the fractured melody again tonight. Instead, I looked at the corkboard. Chase's signature glared in black ink, underlined and notarized. The space beneath the listing still held room for more paper. But I left it blank. Some things deserve space to breathe. They didn't want me back. They wanted a placeholder, a photograph, a symbol of agreement. Someone to stand still and smile on cue, to soften the transaction of memory. I thought of my father's voice, not the one captured in legal briefs, but the one that used to read me Steinbeck under dim lamplight. I hadn't heard that voice in years. I wasn't sure I still knew how to recognize it. They reached out, but not for me. Some mornings begin without needing to announce themselves. I folded the dish towel in half and laid it over the back of the chair. The hem had unraveled slightly along the edge, not enough to fix, but enough to notice. It reminded me of a phrase I'd once heard about people, how some come apart quietly, thread by thread, until one day you realize they're no longer who they were. I turned on the kettle and didn't watch it boil. The window was open a sliver. Outside, the wind moved through the blinds without asking permission. At the Legal Aid Center, they didn't ask about my background, just whether I could organize intake files and call back veterans still waiting for hearings. I wore a navy cotton shirt, ironed but worn thin at the cuffs, and nobody looked twice. There was a desk, a nameplate made of paper, and a drawer that stuck when pulled too fast. I didn't mind. Things that resist are usually still working. A man in his 60s, Robert left a cup of coffee on my desk every Thursday. No words, just the gesture. I never drank it. I let it sit go cold, then poured it out after he left. But I never told him not to bring it. I stopped checking their social media. The first few weeks, I'd peek. Just glances, birthdays, holidays, a caption about resilience through family. Eventually, I no longer needed proof that I had. One morning, I found a message from Noah. Just a short line. I'm Nea. He arrived holding a paper bag with a bakery label I recognized. Inside a scone, cranberry orange. He placed it on the table and didn't sit until I did. The room felt smaller with him in it, not because he took up space, but because I remembered when he didn't. We ate without speaking. Halfway through, he wiped his hands on a napkin and looked at the floor. Back then, when I stayed, I felt like a tenant. You were the only one who ever cleaned up after me. I didn't answer. I reached for my tea and drank, even though it was still too hot. The burn on my tongue was dull. Noah stayed an hour. He didn't ask why I'd moved or how long I planned to stay. When he left, he touched the doorknob, then let go. They don't say your name, he murmured. Not even in passing. I nodded. He closed the door softly. That evening, I threw out the last envelope I'd kept from Maple Ridge. It had once held the typed invitation with the gold trim. The fold line was still sharp. I watched it fall into the trash bin and didn't reach to press it down. A week later, I bought a small clay pot at the Sunday market. No colour, no glaze. I brought home a sprig of mint, not lavender, not lilies, just mint. Practical, plain, alive. It sat on the windowsill where the sun came in only briefly each morning. I watered it when I remembered, trimmed it when it got wild. Nothing sentimental, just enough to keep it growing. I stopped reaching for the music box, not because I'd stopped thinking of her, but because I no longer needed the sound to remember. The silence did fine. The haircut was not planned. The mirror in the thrift shop caught me sideways, shoulders squared, jaw a little tighter than I remembered. I asked the woman behind the counter where she went. The salon smelled like talc and lemon cleaner. I sat down and said, short, past the jaw. Enough to see my neck again. The stylist nodded. Clipped, combed, moved without comment. Hair fell in soft layers onto the black cape. When she was done, she turned the chair. It looked clean. Not fresh, not youthful. Just mine. I walked home without glancing at windows. That night, I swept the floor in wide arcs, careful not to leave strands behind. No photos on the wall. No lists of things to prove. No one to call for approval. I made a sandwich with toasted bread and hard cheese, ate standing up, rinsed the plate and set it on the rack. Before bed, I ran a hand through my shorter hair. It felt unfamiliar, but honest. They wouldn't recognize me now. Not just because of the cut, because I no longer stepped lightly through rooms that didn't want me, because I no longer waited for acknowledgement from mouths that only ever spoke to correct, because I no longer asked what I had done wrong. Somewhere in the quiet between leaving and starting again, I became someone they hadn't prepared for, and I didn't owe them an introduction. There are names that feel like borrowed coats, familiar but never warm. Mine began to feel that way the day the envelope arrived, not because of what it contained, but because of how it was addressed. Miss B. Callahan. No middle name, no title that carried weight, not Major, not Brooke Taylor. Callahan, not even Ms., just a flattened abbreviation like someone referring to a name they'd found in a file they hadn't read. The script was machine-printed on a high-gloss label. Even the return address was outsourced to the law firm, now managing Margot's family foundation. Inside a formal invitation to the launch gala of the Callahan Legacy Fund, printed on thick cardstock, embossed in gold. I read the words once then again. In honor of the enduring values of the late Gregory Callahan. My father's name polished to sound like a statue, carved into something I didn't recognize. The event was scheduled at the Maple Ridge estate, still referred to inexplicably as the Callahan family home. It wasn't. Not anymore. And certainly not for me. I didn't tear the card. I didn't return it crumpled or scorched or scrawled on. I placed it on the kitchen counter next to the chipped coffee mug I'd kept from my service years, the one with a faded decal of an eagle holding a broken chain. The glaze had long since worn off the handle. The next morning, I opened the drawer that held the things I rarely touched, a folded newspaper clipping of my mother's gallery showing a key no longer matched to any door and a sealed manila envelope. The envelope contained a scan of the original will my father and I had drawn up in 2017, the last year he called me by my full name. The original ink had started to feather along the signature line, but the date was still legible. November 3rd. My mother's birthday. Claire had looked it over 6 weeks ago. This still holds weight, she'd said, fingers brushing the edges like a curator, holding something half forgotten. If they ignored it, they gambled. I hadn't told Claire about the invitation. I hadn't told anyone. I drafted the letter on a sheet of cream paper I bought years ago, back when I still believed thank you notes meant something. The pen scratched faintly, ink nearly dry like it too had waited too long. To whom it may concern, have no objection to the establishment of a charitable foundation. I only object to being misrepresented as a supporter of something I was never consulted on. Kindly, remove my name from all event lists and printed materials. Respectfully, BTC, I did not include a return address. I folded the letter with the copy of the 2017 document, sealed both into a plain envelope, and walked to the post office 2 blocks away. I paid in cash for certified delivery. The clerk handed me the receipt, but I didn't keep it. On the way home, I stopped at the corner grocery and bought a pack of sugarless gum and a small bundle of lavender out of season and overpriced, but something about the color matched the sky. Back at the apartment, I tucked the receipt from the post office into the recycling bin without looking at it. The envelope was out of my hands. That was the point. Later that week, a message appeared in my inbox from the same legal office that had once transferred my name off the property deed. A single line. We acknowledge receipt of your correspondence. Your request will be honored. No apology, no inquiry, not even a signature. Noah came by the following weekend. He knocked twice and waited. I let him in without a word. He sat at the table and unwrapped a parcel from the bakery near his dorm. "Lemon poppy seed," he said, placing it in front of me. "The kind you used to bring me when I had exams." I cut a slice, placed it on a napkin, and slid it across the table. He didn't eat right away. He stared at the patch of fading paint on the kitchen wall where I'd tried once to hang a shelf, but never finished. "They're listing the guest wing next month," he murmured, pulling out his phone and showing me a photo. The angle was professional, the lighting soft. "They want to use the proceeds to fund scholarships." I didn't respond. I reached for my cup, instead felt the chip in the rim and drank anyway. "They're calling it legacy work," he said, as if silence erases everything else. I nodded once. The slice of bread remained untouched between us. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "You never fought them." I met his eyes. "I didn't need to." He nodded slowly. "No, I guess you didn't." After he left, I cleared the table and rinsed the cup. The napkin went into the trash without unfolding. I placed the lavender in a jar on the windowsill, next to the mint that had finally started to sprout again. The roots clung to the dark soil like they'd been here longer than I remembered. There was no certificate, no speech, no judge to declare the end of things. Just a letter mailed without a return envelope. Just a name omitted on purpose. Just silence where explanation might have gone. And that silence, I didn't fill it. Some mornings arrive without asking anything of you. They don't pull you into motion or offer a list. They just wait. I woke before the sky shifted. The apartment was cold enough that my breath left a trace against the window glass. I didn't check the time. I knew it by the way the shadows curled at the edge of the ceiling, and by the sound of the neighbor's faucet leaking through the wall. I opened the window. The breeze slipped in like a secret, not warm, not biting. Just enough to remind me I was still here. The mint on the sill had started to crisp at the tips, but the base was holding green and dense, resilient, not because it wanted to be, but because it didn't know any other way to live. I boiled water, not out of habit, not for company, just because the steam gave the room something to do. The tea wasn't the chamomile my mother kept in a tin with a bent lid. It wasn't the bitter green blend my father used to ration into strict portions. This was the box I picked up in aisle 5 last Thursday. Raspberry leaf. Something I'd never tried before. I poured the water slowly. It turned the pale sachet dark and the red bled out in soft pulses. There was no sound except for the click of the kettle shutting off, and the wooden chair groaning as I sat. The radio was already on. I hadn't turned it off the night before. The classical station hummed low a piano piece I didn't recognize. The notes weren't urgent. They rose and faded like someone remembering a name they hadn't spoken in years. On the table, Noah's drawing sat in a plastic sleeve. He'd dropped it off 3 days earlier, tucked between a gas bill and a flyer for mattress sales. It wasn't of the house, not the grand entrance, not the curved staircase Margot had remodeled twice. It was a small window on the east side, framed by ivy and half-sun. The glass had a slight crack in the corner, and behind it you could just make out the edge of a lampshade. It wasn't even a good drawing, technically. The lines wobbled and I set the teacup down on the edge of the frame. Not carelessly, not dramatically. Just a gesture, like ending a sentence. My phone buzzed once, a message from Claire. "Would you like to proceed with the petition to restore asset rights?" I stared at the words, read them as if they were printed in another language, then typed back slowly. "No. I've kept what matters." I didn't wait for a reply. Noah hadn't come by since the morning he mentioned the guest wing being sold. He didn't need to. I knew what he meant by silence. We'd said enough to each other, maybe more than most siblings ever manage. In the afternoon, I watered the mint. It didn't need much. I pinched the edges where they'd browned and let the pieces fall into the sink. No ceremony. I didn't scroll through news feeds. I didn't check the gala photos online. I didn't need confirmation that my absence had gone unmentioned. That too was a gift. The world kept moving. Margot and Chase would keep publishing polished reports and charity updates. People would attend luncheons. Names would be printed in small black font on the backs of pamphlets. Eventually, someone might say, "Weren't there 2 Callahan kids?" And someone else would shrug. I didn't mind being reduced to a question mark. That night, I folded laundry. 2 towels, 3 shirts, 1 pair of slacks I wore twice a week. I noticed a thread had come loose on the collar of my navy blouse. I didn't cut it, just ran my thumb across it and moved on. The drawing remained on the table. I thought briefly about hanging it, then decided not to. It wasn't a symbol. It didn't need to be. At dusk, I sat in the wooden chair by the window. The cushion had lost its shape, but I didn't mind. From that spot, I could see the rooftop of the building across the street, where pigeons gathered before disappearing for the night. One had a missing feather in its wing. It flapped awkwardly, but stayed with the others. I closed my eyes, not to escape, not to forget, but just to let things be still. There was no sound now, except the faint clink of the teacup as the breeze moved through the room. A small draft touched the back of my neck. I didn't reach for a sweater. No one called my name. No one knocked, and for the first time the quiet didn't echo. It settled. And so did I.